The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents, I Don't Believe That. So I do a lot of conversations on the Atheist Experience TV show. We're taking calls all the time. I've made tons and tons of mistakes, both factual mistakes and strategic mistakes over the years. And one of the things that I want to do with the Atheist Debates project, in addition to posting the debates and the debate reviews, is to address things that I've learned throughout the years that can benefit all of us. And the fact that I still don't get this right all of the time should perhaps make people who don't do it for a living feel a little better, or maybe you're just better at it than I am. But today, I want to address something that comes up very, very commonly. And that is, when you say, I don't believe that, some people hear that as, I don't believe you. They think that you believe they are lying. Now, we see this in a lot of different conversations, not just with regard to the individual you're talking to, but with regard to any type of what they perceive as eyewitness or testimonial type of evidence. So when it comes to Christianity, when we talk about the Gospels, what we'll hear is, oh, well, do you think these guys were all just lying? As if the only options were they are lying or they are telling the truth and this is correct. The accuracy of the story that they're telling is independent from whether or not they are knowingly engaged in deception. If I say somebody's lying, I mean that they are intentionally presenting things that they do not believe, or that they know to not be true, etc. It's not merely that someone is mistaken. And this is the thing that gets overlooked. When somebody says, I had this great experience where I was, my life was a mess and I was on drugs and I was just irresponsible. And I had an experience where I felt God come into my life. And now I'm off drugs and I'm a responsible, loving, caring, giving person. My response typically is just not to say, I don't believe that. I have to phrase it in a slightly different way. What I want to say is, I'm happy to believe that you've had some experience. I'm just not happy to accept your explanation for that experience. There's a difference between I do not believe that, the claim, and I do not believe you. Those two things get conflated all the time. How many times have you been in a conversation with someone where you've expressed that you are not convinced of what they're saying, and they'll say, you think I'm lying? I don't know. It's not outside the realm of possibility that someone is lying. It's not even that surprising to find that somebody might be exaggerating. Hey, I went fishing and I caught a fish this big. We're all aware of that. We're all aware that people exaggerate. We speak hyperbolically all the time. There you go. All the time. Literally not all the time. It is a common occurrence. And in some cases, it's not a big problem. When I say we engage in hyperbole all the time, you hopefully understand what I mean. But when we're talking about a claim and someone's personal experience, and they say, this happened to me, I think that we need to do our best to make sure that they're aware that we're not calling them liars. We don't think they're intentionally trying to deceive us, because I would argue that in order to conclude that someone is intentionally trying to deceive us, you need additional evidence. You need evidence that they in fact believe something else, or in fact know something else to be the case. Not merely that it's been explained to them and they should understand it. I have a friend who thinks Ray Comfort is lying about evolution because it's been explained to him so many times there's just no way he couldn't understand it. Well, I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that Ray Comfort is lying. I think he's accurately telling people what he believes, but him accurately telling me what he believes is independent from whether or not what he claims is believable and or true. And so when we're engaged in these conversations, and once again, I'm going to get it wrong probably more often than anybody else since I do this more often. But if we make it clear that I'm willing to accept that you've had an experience, I'm just not necessarily willing to accept your explanation for that experience, I think that goes a long way. And the reason I wanted to address this now is because not only does it happen on the show, And I've tried to do a really good job in recent years of making sure that when I'm talking to someone, that I make this distinction. But it's come up when, do you think the apostles were lying? It goes back to C.S. Lewis, Liar, Lunatic, Lord. Do you think Jesus was lying? What are the options? He was a liar, he was crazy, or he was God? Or that we don't have an accurate representation of what he actually said, or that we don't have a way to conclude which of those may in fact be true? Oh, could he have been lying? Sure. Could he have been crazy? Sure. Could he be God? I don't know. I don't see any evidence that there could be a God, but at least if you're going to list that as a potential candidate for an explanation, I'm going to reject it as the greater miracle of those. That of the potentials, the notion that he's God is the one that is more miraculous and more without evidentiary support. But at the end of the day, we're talking about things that people believe, and they believe to their core. There's a Twitter conversation that's happened in the past couple of days, and because I ended up not participating and eventually blocking the person who was just constantly a barrage of things, I was accused of, well, I didn't present any evidence, and then here's Matt, this guy who wants to pretend to be the paragon of reason, who just blocks people because they disagree with him. Well, the truth is, that's not why I blocked it. Twitter is a terrible format for debates. And I actually, at the moment, have a bunch of stuff going on in my life, in personal issues, health issues, money issues, everything else. And I'm still, doing these videos. I'm still engaging in debates. And so my time is at a premium. And if I open up something like Twitter and I just see this barrage of, here's a tweet with, 10, 15, 20 people's tags on it, and it's a one-line thing that in much like creationists can say something in a second that might take an hour to rebut, it's just frustrating to get that constant stream. Now, I understand that from other people's point of view, they don't have access to what's going on in my head. And this is the key to drive home. Stop pretending that you can read people's minds. Stop pretending that you can address their motivations unless they've made claims about their motivations, or their motivations are made clear in such a way that you can openly and honestly address them. If someone is figuratively putting their fingers in the ears, you can make a case for that. If they're literally doing it, you can make an even better case for it. But at the end of the day, if you presume that everybody knows and understands what you do, and therefore when you hear something from someone, you're going to, that is in conflict with the way you understand reality to be, it's a mistake to conclude that they are lying. Even if you suspect that they're lying, unless you think you can strongly make this case, it's probably better to say, I'm willing to accept this, but I'm not convinced of that. To say, I don't believe that, and make it clear that you're not saying, I don't believe you. That distinction can go a long way to preventing some of the roadblocks that are going to come up in a conversation. The roadblocks are still going to be there. These are views about religion people take to the very core of who they are and how they identify. It's not surprising that this is the case, but that is one of many things to be cognizant of when you're actually engaging. I mention all this in a video because it just keeps happening. I've talked about it before in different senses, but I wanted a shorter video that actually just addressed that. When somebody comes and tells me, hey, last night I was visited by a ghost, I'm willing to accept that they are honestly trying to relay some experience, but I'm not willing to accept that their conclusion about the facts about that experience is accurate. Maybe this comes from years of being a magician. I'm watching people fool themselves, watching them leave a magic show and saying, man, here's what I saw. And what they describe is not only better than what the magician did, it's probably better than what he could have done if he's done his job well or she's done her job well. Getting people to realize that there's a process that skeptics engage in, where skepticism of religious claims necessarily leads to non-theistic views. Basically the arguments for the existence of God haven't met their burden of proof, and so the proper position within skepticism is to say, I'm still unconvinced of that. And perhaps that's a better language to use, rather than I don't believe that, is to say, I am not convinced of that. The problem is, we've substituted, and it seems softer, but it's just as easy for somebody to say, What do you mean you're not convinced of that? Do you think I'm lying? And so we need to be clear that we're not necessarily convinced somebody's lying. And whether or not they're lying is independent from whether or not what they're claiming is actually accurate. So they believe in ghosts, and they say they believe in ghosts because they were visited by their grandmother. Now, maybe they made that entire story up about the ghostly visitation, but they could still be correct about ghosts, at least hypothetically. And so when you say, I'm not convinced that you were actually visited by your grandmother, there's no way to address that sort of personal experience without it coming off as personal. And so it requires a little bit extra effort if in fact you care about actually having the conversation with somebody. Now, that's not always the case. And there are certainly occasions on the show where I will just shut a conversation down because I have the benefit of 5 other callers waiting on the line who may have a conversation that is going to go somewhere, where I have someone who has a sufficient understanding of reason and cares enough about truth to be honest in those conversations, and to not be defensive. And when I say to be honest, I don't mean that I suspect that they're lying. I think a lot of times what happens is that there are defense mechanisms that come up where they're honestly trying to accurately relay the experience and their understanding of it, and they don't even realize that they might be exaggerating. Because it's very important for them to convince you of this because they need to be believed. And so what they tend to exaggerate most is not necessarily the events, but their confidence in the explanation for the events, which is one of the reasons why Anthony Magnabosco and I have talked about the efficacy of street epistemology, because what street epistemology does is addresses that confidence level and gets them to either lower it optimistically, or at least recognize that they were falsely inflating that confidence level prior. On some occasions, somebody's lying, and if you think you can make the case, make it. But if you can't, or if you're not sure that you can, it's just as much a mistake to shift the burden of proof onto you to demonstrate that somebody's lying as it would be to walk into a courtroom and say, Your Honor, I can prove my innocence, when you can't. And you didn't need to, because the point is somebody has to demonstrate your guilt. Shifting the burden of proof is a mistake, but when you do it in such a way that you also put up the person you're talking to, put up their defenses, make them feel as if you are directly insulting them or disparaging them rather than what they are claiming, that's a problem. And that's it for this one. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.